Hi, so today's topic is going to be decentralized autonomous organizations, or also known as DAO. My name is David Barreto. I'm an engineer in Toronto, Canada. You can find me on my personal blog at david-barreto.com or find me on Twitter at barretodavid. So first of all, what is a DAO? I think the best analogy for a DAO is that it is an organization that is native to the blockchain, or what we know now as a Web3 as well. It can be configured to behave in multiple ways. It could be configured to work as a regular company that seeks a profit, or it could be configured to work as a non-profit organization. There's not an exact mapping of the real legal world versus the blockchain, but there are approximations. But let's always keep in mind that this is a completely new type of entity. Of course, this is native to the blockchain, but it's not native to the legal system that we have, where enterprises are created, for example. So it's not yet legally recognized, although I've heard that there's at least one country that has started to legally recognize DAOs as organizations. I forgot what country was that. One very interesting characteristic of DAOs when it compares to regular companies is that DAOs are radically transparent in the way they make decisions and what those decisions are, and also in the way they handle their treasury, their funds. They're also usually democratic. And when I say, I put it in quotes just because this democracy is not exactly as a democracy you might be used to, like when one person, one vote, or what we call like the representative democracy or direct participation democracy. It could behave like some of those types, but it could be even more like a fluid scenario between the representative and participative democracies. But of course, this is something that the DAO has to configure to behave that way. So it's not a default. And when you want to participate in a DAO, like as an investment, for example, instead of in a regular company, you will buy shares of the company or stock. In a DAO, usually you can buy tokens that represent ownership of the DAO. The DAO, or every DAO, has four main building blocks. The first one is the most important one, is the community. It's a group of people that work together towards a particular goal. So you're gonna see there are gonna be DAOs that are used for trying to buy a particular NFT. There are DAOs for social causes. So it's a community of people that want to make that goal to be a reality. Of course, usually this community is geographically dispersed. So usually they use a chat room. Something Discord is very popular for DAOs to use. Basically, it's a place for people discuss ideas and proposals before they go to a more trying to find a consensus on what to do. So when it's time to actually get consensus and decision making time, DAOs also have usually, not always, but usually, they have a voting mechanism where the community just reaches an agreement. So this voting is the first part that actually lives on the blockchain, because the community and the chat room, let's say Discord it's not a blockchain exclusive, it's just a communication, like a chat room. But the voting itself, it is a blockchain part. And then we have the treasury, where all the funds for the DAO are stored to make the communal goal a reality. So the treasury as well is another piece that lives on the blockchain. We're going to see a couple of ways the treasury is handled, basically through a regular wallet with a private key, or more frequently through the use of a multisig wallet. So let me give you an example of when a DAO could be useful. Let's say that we have three friends, Bob, Alice, and Jim, that they actually want to buy some virtual land. Could be in Decentraland, could be in the Sandbox, one of those NFT games. The issue that they have is that the virtual land is pretty expensive. So the one that they have in mind actually costs $50,000. And this is a realistic number for how much virtual land costs these days. But let's say that none of them, they have $50,000 to invest. Bob has $5,000, Alice has $35,000, and Jim has only $10,000. So individually, they cannot buy, but they have the idea of to create a DAO and to pull all those funds they have individually into the DAO, so the DAO will have enough money to purchase the land, and instead what they have is gonna like shares of the DAO. So when they create the DAO, the first thing they do is that they create the treasury, and they define, for example, a token that only exists for this DAO in particular. And they say that for the token of the DAO, there's an exchange rate of 1,000 USD for one token. So when Bob sends his money, I'm putting here in USD, but usually is in cryptocurrency, in ETH or any other compatible token. So Bob sends his $5,000 into the treasury, and the treasury is gonna create 5 tokens and to give him back those 5 tokens. So Bob is gonna have in his wallet 5 tokens of whatever the DAO cryptocurrency is named. Alice the same. It's just when she gives 35,000, she gets back 35 tokens, and Jim gets back 10 tokens. So at this point, the DAO has $50,000 in the treasury, and usually this treasury is going to be handled with a Multisig Wallet. We're going to talk more about that later. So when it's time to buy the land, of course, there are going to be multiple options for multiple NFT games. So let's say, for example, they discuss on Discord and say, well, maybe this land could be interesting. So they submit a proposal for a vote. And the vote is, should we buy virtual land A for $50,000? I mean, virtual land A meaning that it's a very particular plot of land in a very particular game. So this vote, it's not like the typical democratic vote when you have one person, one vote, because you can configure that to behave differently. It could be one person, one vote, but in this case, they configure the vote to be, let's say, is proportional to how many tokens from the DAO you have. So for example, Bob, in this case, he doesn't agree and he votes no. And because he has 5 tokens, his vote has a weight of 5. Or let's say it's kind of like similar to say that he voted 5 times no. Alice, because she has more tokens, her vote, when she voted yes, she actually get a multiplier of 35, or like 35 votes for yes. And Jim also, like Bob, decided that this is not a good idea, so he votes no. And his vote has a power or a weight of 10. So as you can see, in a regular democracy of one person, one vote, this proposal will fail because 2 people voted no, but because they configured it out to be a vote proportional to how many tokens, in this case the proposal get approved because Alice voted yes and she has more tokens than Jim and Bob combined. So that's a very important distinction about DAOs. When we say democracy, you have to know how it's being configured because it could behave differently to what you have in mind. So because the proposal passed, now the treasury, maybe it was configured to automatically go and purchase that plot of virtual land. So now the DAO, the treasury, instead of holding the equivalent of $50,000 in cryptocurrency, it holds an NFT that represents that virtual land, and the shares, the tokens that each one of its members has, act as a piece of the treasury, right? So the 5 tokens that Bob has represent, like, Bob's technically owns 10% of the treasury, or 10% of the NFT that the treasury is holding. And you can see the progression for the Alice and Jim as well. So obviously Alice owns the biggest share with 70% of the treasury. Let's say now, the whole idea that they invested in the first time is just because they expect that in the future, this virtual land is going to be more expensive and they can sell it for a profit. So if we fast forward, let's say a couple of months, now that virtual plot of land, instead of be valued at $50,000, now it's valued at $100,000. So they decide, hey, this is maybe a good time to sell. So they discuss on Discord what to do with the NFT. So they say, okay, let's put it to a vote. I think might be a good time to sell. So the vote says, should we sell the virtual land for $100,000? So in this case, now the 3 participants of the DAO, they all agree that that should be the result. So the vote passes. And as a result, the NFT gets sold, and now the Treasury has $100,000 in tokens, right? Instead of having the NFT, because the NFT was sold in an NFT marketplace. So now for the members of the DAO to actually redeem the money, they can actually do the opposite transaction they did before. They send the tokens back, and what they get in return is actually cryptocurrency for a preset amount. So in this case, the preset amount is $2,000 per token, right? Because the Treasury doubled in value. So now Bob is getting $10,000 back for his 5 tokens, when before he only had to put 5,000. And the same with the other 2. The investment duplicated in value. So this is a very simple, actually fairly common example of how a DAO can be used. It doesn't need to be a super DAO. You can make a DAO with your friends for purposes like this one. We briefly discussed about how this voting work, and I mentioned that it depends on the DAO's configure, how similar it is to what the notion of democracy that we have in mind. In the example that I showed you, we can say that 1 coin equals 1 vote, or 1 token equals 1 vote. So if you only have 1 token, you only have 1 vote. But if you have 3 tokens, you have 3 votes. It's not like you can vote 3 different times. It's just like your single vote now has the weight of 3 votes, which that's why Alice was able to push the DAO for buying the NFT, even though Jim and Bob were against that. So there's some pros and cons for this type of democracy. The pro is that it's very easy to implement. Actually, this is kind of like the default for many DAOs on how governance is configured. It can work as a way to raise funds, because maybe you start only with 3 friends investing, but maybe in the future you can open up the DAO for more people that you don't know to participate, and they only have to just purchase more tokens from the DAO treasury. The treasury can keep minting tokens. So it's a way to increase how much money the treasury of the DAO has, and without having to know all the people who are joining. Of course, the negative is that this kind of governance leads to plutocracy, which is the governance of the rich, and that unfortunately votes can be purchased, right? If tomorrow there's a more contentious vote, someone can just buy a lot of tokens just for that particular vote to pass, and then dump the tokens once the voting has passed. There are some techniques to try to mitigate those risks, but it's important to keep those in mind. One very common mitigation strategy for this kind of governance is what's called quadratic voting. Next, we can maybe configure a DAO that instead of being 1 coin, 1 vote, is to be 1 wallet to equal 1 vote. This, you might think that this equals to 1 person, 1 vote, but unfortunately, it's very easy to create multiple wallets that belong to the same person. It's very hard to know if the same person is behind 3 different wallets, right? Because at the end of the day, identification is one of the weak spots of the blockchain, but it's slightly better than the previous approach, especially because this could work very well when you have a close community, almost like a club, right? Let's say 20 members, and the members know each other well. So it's very hard to suddenly, there's 20 members and then suddenly there's 50 wallets, right? The people will know something is wrong. So for a small club, for a small DAO with people that know each other, this works pretty well, but it doesn't scale, because the moment you try to open up for more people that you don't know, there's a potential to be exploited the way that I'm explaining, like a single person created multiple wallets, and that way having more weight to their votes. This is also fairly easy to implement, similar to the previous approach. But as I mentioned before, negative is it can be exploited in an open community. A third approach that I found also very interesting is that you can actually have one human to be one vote. And you can do that with the help of another DApp or blockchain project called Proof of Humanity, which basically tries to map one wallet address to one person through a mechanism of humans vouching for each other. So the positive of using the system for governance is that this is what thing about democracy is: one person, one vote. So it's suitable for open communities. The negative side is that it's difficult to implement. These technologies are still in the early stages. Proof of Humanity, I think they are on Ethereum, but they just moved as well to be on XDAI, another chain. And it's fairly expensive to use. I tried to register myself, and I was blown away that just to enter the registry, I had to pay like $600. Of those, I think 200 were just gas fees. So that actually is a very high barrier of entry for anyone who wants to participate. So we talk about governance, different types. You're gonna have to choose which one suits better your needs. Let's talk now about the treasury, right? The wallet. As I mentioned, maybe in the old days, or one way to do it is that you have your DAO members, right? In this circle here, and if someone has a wallet, then you will say, well, the only way to have a treasury is to actually have a regular wallet with a private key that belongs to a single person. So you're gonna have to assign one person in the role of the treasury manager. And this person is the only one with access to the private key to actually make use of the funds of the treasury, because it's just a regular wallet. And this person can, for example, pay a contractor for some services for the DAO. But the issue now here is that the DAO members will have to trust that this person is not going to run away with the funds. And this is a dicey proposition. This maybe is good if it's a closed DAO, a club, people know each other. Maybe this can work. But there's a better way to handle this, and it's by using a multisig wallet for the treasury. In a multisig wallet, it works fairly similar to a joint bank account, where every member of the DAO has access to it, and you can configure that multisig wallet to say, you know what, my DAO has 6 members. I think in this case it has more, 2, 4, 6. Well, it has 8. So I made some mistake here with the numbers of approvals. But you can configure, for example, if you have 8 members, say, well, anyone can propose a transaction or with the wallet, but the transaction is not going to occur until there's enough approval from the other DAO members for this particular transaction, right? So in this example that I messed up the numbers, let's say there's 6 persons on the DAO as members, you can configure for a transaction to only happen if at least 4 people from the DAO give approval to a certain transaction. And only when that threshold is reached, then the multisig wallet triggers the transaction. In this case, could be pay some ether to some person for whatever service. So this is a much better way to handle the funds. Now you don't have to trust a single person. You only have to configure this wallet sort of the right way. And there's a collective ownership of the treasury. Some examples of DAOs, fairly recent. It's maybe one of the most well-known is the Constitution DAO. And this DAO, its purpose was the purchase of one of the 13 original copies of the US Constitution, which is a little strange to say original copy. Just keep in mind, when the Constitution of the US was created in the late 18th century, they were, I think, 13 colonies. So they have to make 13 copies and sign the 13 copies. The founding fathers to send one of each to each colony. So one of those 13s were put for an auction in Sotheby's, one of these famous companies that deals with the bids and auctions for this type of things. So almost as a joke, people from Twitter started to say, oh, it would be funny if we created a DAO to raise fund and to actually buy that constitution. But the people got so involved that the joke became a project and became a reality. So that's how the Constitution DAO came to be, almost like a joke of buying the Constitution. So they set up the treasury of the DAO to say, okay, if anyone who gives 1 ETH to the treasury, they're gonna get back a token that they call people. They're gonna get 1 million people in return. So that way they were able to raise funds for going to the auction. And even though this was a joke, it turns out that in 7 days they raised $47 million, and which was incredible. But even though they have that amount of money, when they went to the auction, they actually lost. And why they lost? Well, because the blockchain is completely transparent. So everyone knew that the DAO had that amount of money. So another person who wanted to actually buy the Constitution knew exactly that if they only had like a $1 more than what the DAO have, so they could easily just win the auction. And that's what happened, right? So like, I think the lesson learned is that sometimes being a completely open system can play against things like this, right? Trying to win an auction. Interestingly, once the auction was lost, every person who donated ETH, they had the option to withdraw the money, so give back the token and they get back the ETH that they gave initially. But the people token started to be traded like any other cryptocurrency, and the people token started to have value on its own. So some people decided not to get the refund back and just kept the token, the people token, and that people token could go up and down value. So that was very interesting development, and just organically it became a cryptocurrency on itself when it was just like a receipt for a donation. Another example of a DAO is the Assange DAO, which was set up the day after that the UK allowed for the extradition of Julian Assange to the US. And if you don't remember, Julian Assange was the founder of WikiLeaks. So what happened there is that there was a group on Telegram that they were discussing about Assange, and someone had the idea of, why don't we set up a DAO and we raise funds to actually pay for Assange, legal fees and do campaigns and all that. And the brother of Assange joined the Telegram and say, hey, you know what? I'm actually working right now to create an NFT with a person called Pac. This is like pseudonymous. No one knows who Pac is. But Pac is very famous in the NFT space because he has able to create very valuable NFT collections. So they had this project in mind to create this NFT and to raise funds through the sale of the NFT. So the DAO basically was a way to raise funds to purchase the NFT, and the money of the purchase of the NFT used to pay for Julian Assange legal fees. So they actually used the same platform as Constitution DAO used. It's called Juicebox. In this case, they created their own token that is called Justice, and the same exchange rate, 1 ETH, 1 million Justice token, and they were able to raise in 5 days $40 million. Again, very impressive. So luckily this time they actually won the auction. They were able to actually buy the NFT with that money, and that money is being used, as I mentioned, to pay for Julian Assange legal defense and for PR campaigns as well. So at the center of the DAO and the things that live in the blockchain, I mentioned that the Multisig Wallet is a very important one. It's this collective ownership of the Treasury. Probably the most well-known Multisig Wallet is Gnosis Safe. It's the leading Multisig wallet. It is available on multiple blockchains, so it doesn't need to be on Ethereum. Could be on Polygon, could be and many more, and even testnets. One of the cool things is that it's available not only as a web app, but also they have a desktop version, and more importantly, they have a mobile app. The mobile app doesn't have all the features that the web version has, for example, or the desktop version, but it's enough to keep track of all the transactions and to give approval to those transactions, which I think is the most important thing. And they implement a way to give approval to those transactions in a gasless way. It means that you don't have to pay for gas fees, which, as you know, in Ethereum is very expensive. So this is a very important thing, and maybe that's why it's one of the most popular options for this purpose. Also very interesting, it has integration with some leading dApps. Like for example, I saw that you can use a Compound like for lending, and instead of just using like something like MetaMask or Wallet Connect, they have a very simple and like an integrated interface that you can use for those protocols within Gnosis Safe. So I think it makes it easier to use. And you can actually extend this Multisig wallet to actually behave like a full DAO, like having even a voting mechanism as well. This is through a module system, I think it's called Zodiac, that you can use. So you can start with something very simple, a Multisig wallet, and little by little start adding modules. So you will have a more robust DAO that you can use. Another option for creating a DAO that I have explored is the Aragon Client. And the good thing is about the Aragon Client is like a one-stop solution for DAOs. It has pretty much anything or everything that you might need for a DAO in one place. It's available, to my knowledge, only on Ethereum and Polygon and testnets. One cool thing is that it has predefined templates for quick DAO creation. So as I mentioned, you can create a DAO for multiple purposes. It could be a for-profit company, it could be a non-for-profit. You can have different voting mechanisms. So they have templates that pre-configure a lot of the things about how the Treasury is managed for different purposes that you can just click and creates the DAO for you automatically with those settings. It also has an integrated Multisig Wallet. They have like a finance module that allows for this Multisig Wallet, and it's connected to the voting mechanism. And interesting enough, you can actually use dApps, or you can interact with dApps using that Multisig Wallet using something they call Agent that uses a wallet that is called Frame. Maybe the downside is when I try to use this, especially when using Frame and using Agent, it's not very straightforward how to use it. It's kind of complicated. So I can see people who are new to the blockchain to be kind of confused on how to use all these things. It's possible, it works. It's just not very easy at the moment to use. Another downside is that it doesn't have yet a web app. Sorry, it doesn't have a mobile app. It only exists as a web app. And this is, I think, a downside given that most people have a mobile phone, but they might not have a laptop or a tablet to use. But the pro is that it's a one-stop solution for everything you need. So I think it's a very good place to start to understand how DAO works. Maybe for some scenarios it works pretty well, but it's up to you what you want to give more importance. Is it ease of use or feature reach? That's it. That's all for DAOs, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.